Benchmark, the voice of business. Presented by LMD.
On this edition of Benchmark, former senior diplomat and UN Under-Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs Jayantha Dhanapala joins us on the program today and outlines his wish list for Sri Lanka in 2018. Then, Nielsen's Managing Director Sharang Pant discusses the BCI's positive momentum, and LMD's columnist Shiran Fernando wraps up the show with his take on the prospects for Sri Lanka's economy this year. That's the lineup for Benchmark.
Hello and welcome to Benchmark, the Big Picture Business Program. I'm Savitri Rodrigo. We are indeed very delighted to welcome back to our show the former UN Under-Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs, Jayantha Dhanapala. He is in fact a former president of the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. So on the program today, he will be discussing a range of subjects, starting off with his wish list for 2018. Mr. Dhanapala, Happy New Year to you and welcome back.
Very Happy New Year to you and to your viewers. I also wanted to say that we hope this year will be a very fulfilling year for your program as well.
Thank you so much. So, given that start, what's your wish list for 2018?
Well, it's a long list because of the unfulfilled wishes of the past, both for our country and for the global scene. But for Sri Lanka, we have been in reverse gear, I think, since 2015. And it is time we got back on track to fulfilling the promises that were made to the population in 2015 at the presidential election and at the parliamentary election. We have slipped on the goals that we had set ourselves. We must get back onto fulfilling those goals. It's a very, very crucial year, because for the first time we are going to have elections which will be on a new basis in February, on the 10th of February for local government. And although that will not change government, it will be a barometer of the political feelings in the country, the opinions of the people. But also it will lead to a fulfillment of a promise that was made with regard to more meaningful democracy in the country. And we would hope that with the participation of all the parties, with also more participation of women in the actual seating of the local bodies, we will see greater democracy in the country and a greater participation of the people in the democratic process.
Mr. Dhanapala, speaking of 2015, in that change of regime, there was so much expectation. What is your, do you think enough is being done, or what is your assessment of the governance since then?
It's a curate's egg kind of situation. We have achieved some things, but we have not achieved many. On corruption, we have just seen with the publication of the bond scam report of the central bank, the extent of corruption at that level, which was very, very disappointing. We have also not seen a prosecution of the enormous acts of corruption which took place under the previous regime. These are being done in a very slow and haphazard way, and there is no conviction on the part of the people that the government is genuinely honest about prosecuting wrongdoers from the previous government. So what has happened is that the goal of total honesty and a corruption-free administration has not been achieved. And we have still a long way to go there. We have still also a long way to go with regard to justice, achieving human rights and ensuring popular justice with regard to the human rights situation, because there were vast sections of the people who felt aggrieved and they have still not been satisfied. Take, for example, the people who were arrested wrongfully under the previous government, who have still not got their freedom. There are still people in jail. There are still people also who have not had their land freed for them, And this is again an injustice that has to be rectified.
Is there danger of the state falling into hands of oppressive and undemocratic groups?
Well, this is a danger that we still have not completely averted, because we have talked about having hate-free society, but the prosecutions of hate crimes has not been pursued actively. The government, I think, has been rather timid about prosecuting leading members of the clergy and of other civil society groups who have expressed their views on a very majoritarian point of view. And I think that has to be stopped. Otherwise, we might escalate this situation into what happened in July of 1983 and the other terrible situations. We are unlikely to have another civil war as we did after 2009, but incidents such as Beruwala, Alutgama and other incidents are very all too frequent, and hate and prejudice against each other is very close to the surface, and it only requires mob violence to escalate this, or hate-filled speech to propagate the kind of violence that we've seen before.
What about the country's infrastructure? Is there adequate focus on developing it sustainably?
I think there is. I think there was a lot done under the previous regime, but of course it put us into debt, and that debt had to be converted into equity, particularly with regard to the Hambantota port and the Mattala airport. But I think the government has taken wise action to do what they did in the circumstances they were faced with. And I hope that since the December tranche of the income for the Hambantota port has already started coming in, it's an indication that it was a wise move. So the same thing has to be done. Now we are now building the central highway, and we are also building a highway to the north. We are building other highways to Ratnapura and so on. And I think on the infrastructure front we are making good progress. The question is to raise money on the right terms, which are not a burden to the country in the future. And if that can be done, then I think the infrastructure needs of the country will be met.
Do you think we have seen progress in terms of ensuring greater equality among our citizenry?
No, that has not been done for two reasons. One is the question of having an equitable development all through the country, in the provinces as well as in Colombo. We have focused too much on infrastructure and development in Colombo, and in this idea of having a megapolis in Colombo. The port and the high-rise buildings that come up on apartment fronts, perhaps there is now a glut of flats in apartment blocks in Colombo. But we need to look elsewhere and look at the provinces, not only in the north, but in the central parts of the country and the east and the west and in the south. All that is, there has to be equitable distribution of the largesse of the government. There has also got to be investment in all parts of the country. Not only the question of regional development, there is also a neglect of the various strata of income earners, because we have focused on the rich and not on the poorer sections of humanity. This, unfortunately, is a global pattern, where there is the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and this has been commented upon by many people. We have more millionaires, not only in the United States, but in China, and probably small amount of millionaires in our own country, whereas we are not addressing the needs of the middle class and the poorer classes. That redistribution with growth was a fundamental objective of the World Bank in the 1970s. We are now seeing a return to that goal on the part of economists. But in Sri Lanka, we have not yet focused on that. Unfortunately, we had a green economy fostered by the budget of Mr. Mangala Samarveera, who has to be congratulated on his first maiden budget. But we need to also look into the redistribution of income so that people feel a part of this growth that we now see in Sri Lanka. We see a lot of very opulent hotels, Shangri-La in Colombo, and a hotel in Nuwara and a hotel in Kandy. But is that all that we have? What about the poor man on the street? Can he share in this growth and development?
It's certainly a thought to take forward.
It's a very urgent thought, because the more you neglect it, the more you are stoking up fires for the future, revolutionary fires.
So we're going to go in for a break, Mr. Dhanapala, and be back for more discussion on these subjects. After the break, Jayantha Dhanapala discusses the state of the world and also discusses his thoughts on achieving world peace. So do stay with us.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
We understand that savings provide for life's special moments. That's why we were the first bank to introduce an incentivized savings scheme, Pathum Vimana. We changed how a nation felt about savings because we believe in banking beyond transactions. HNB, your partner in progress.
Thank you for staying with Benchmark. We are continuing our discussion with the former UN Under Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs, Jayantha Dhanapala, and also the former president of the Pugwash Conferences on Science and World Affairs. Mr. Dhanapala, just what are the key concerns when it comes to law and order in the country?
The key concerns are that the law and order is not being enforced equitably. There are selective actions taken, sometimes too little, too late. If it is done consistently, then I think people will have the confidence that whatever happens, you are all equal before the law. That is not yet seeped through to society. People feel that justice is meted out selectively. In other words, if you have important connections, you can get off. But if you are a poor man, you are liable to be prosecuted or acted upon with a lot of vigor by the police. The police are also not totally efficient. I mean, we have some very strange things happening from the top, and I think we need to have a more efficient police. And this was commented upon by the chairperson of our National Human Rights Commission, Dr. Deepika Udagama. So we need to strengthen the police and their systems of operating so that there is confidence inculcated in the people about the administration of justice.
So, Mr. Dhanapala, Sri Lanka has been having its share of natural disasters, especially in the last year. How would you rate Sri Lanka's efforts when it comes to dealing with climate resilience and climate change?
We have not done enough about disaster prevention. After the horrible tragedy of the tsunami, we, I must say, got a very good system developed with regard to early warning systems so that a tsunami will no longer take place in Sri Lanka without adequate precautions in the country. But not so with regard to flooding. We've had flooding almost every year. Now, China is a very good example of flood control. The Huanghe was described as the sorrow of China because of the periodic flooding there. But you no longer hear about flooding in that scale. So why was that not the case? I think clearly very efficient flood control measures were taken earlier in the course of rivers, and we have to do the same thing. We have certain parts of the country frequently flooded every year, and we never learn a lesson. Now, obviously, we have got very good engineers in this country, we have got very good flood control experts, but they are not allowed the ability to set their ideas in motion. And I think that is very, very vital, because we look at the other problem of garbage dumps collapsing. Mitotamulda was one, and there were others as well. Now, here again, it requires control and good management, and that was not the case in Sri Lanka. We have to improve our administrative system so that we are sure that we prevent this human tragedies as a result of neglect on our part.
So let's check on what's been happening around the world. The last year has been quite historic, so to speak. Given the measures taken by the Trump administration, we've been seeing a rise in nuclear threats by North Korea. We've also been seeing negotiations where Brexit is concerned. What is your assessment of the state of the world at the moment?
I take my cue from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who has just completed 1 year in the job. And he says, I'm no longer making appeals. I'm issuing red alerts. The situation is so serious in the world that unless people are aware of the extremity of the crisis, nothing will get done. Not only do we have the disaster, and I'm very frank about it, of Mr. Trump in the White House, but we also have several other problems that are unattended. There is the question of climate change, where Mr. Trump is going to withdraw from the Paris Consensus in contrast to every other country in the world. And so that's going to set back. We are right now having what is called a bomb cyclone in the eastern part of the United States, with not only snow but also cyclonic winds in New York and Washington. But that is not the only situation where we have had examples of a very serious climate change situation. And unless we address efforts towards trying to combat that, Sri Lanka in its budget was trying to do that in a modest way, but there are bigger economies, especially the United States, which unless they act will continue with the same consumption patterns and produce CO2s. Look at India. We had a test match between Sri Lanka and India, very seriously hampered to the risk of the health of our players by what happened in Delhi. I was surprised that that match was not called off. It might have benefited the Indians to make sure that other test teams would come to that country, unless that attention was paid to the smog-filled air of Delhi. So we have to make very speedy action on this issue. But there are other issues. There is the question of the refugees. We've had an unprecedented rise in the refugee population, people streaming across the world, not only the Rohingyas, but also from the time of the previous year. We've had people risking life and death by going to swimming across the Mediterranean from the northern shores of Africa to Europe in search of greener pastures, and finding the gates shut in their face in a very inhuman way. So although the Refugee Convention was signed in 1951, very few countries are genuinely implementing it. And I must say, once again, tribute must be given to Angela Merkel, even though she has suffered in the polls as a consequence, for her generosity of spirit in opening the doors of Germany to refugees. More countries should do that, particularly countries that are affluent and who can afford to take in people from the developing countries.
Unfortunately, regimes are built on populism and not on humanism. So,
But that populism is veering towards extreme racism and xenophobia, and that is what has to be stopped, because we are all one human family, and unless we take care of the needier members of our family as we do in our villages and in our own homes, we are not going to be able to survive as a common human family.
so this leads me to world peace. The Global Peace Index for 2017 said there is overall more peace in the world than there was earlier. But on the other hand, the more peaceful and the less peaceful, the gap has widened. Do you expect any progress to be achieved in this sphere in global peace in the next year?
I think the Middle East is a very serious problem, particularly with the very controversial decisions taken by Mr. Trump in accepting Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This is going to exacerbate tensions in a part of the world which has had tensions for a very long time, but it's going to be even worse now. We are also seeing actions taken by the United States against Iran, which has been settled by the JCPOA, the program of action negotiated by the Europeans as well as the British and the Americans some time ago. But if he's going to tear up that agreement, then we are going to see Iran being targeted once again, as the Americans have been targeting Iran since Mossadegh. There's also the danger that we are going to see Saudi Arabia and Israel join forces with the United States in attacking Iran, and I would not be surprised if there are some aggressive actions taken in Iran, very provocative actions, rather like what was done with Saddam Hussein, when there was no evidence whatsoever of Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. Problems in Yemen and other places and Syria continue in the Middle East. I also want to talk about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and Kim Jong-un, where everybody has been blaming him, and where, of course, there has been justifiable United Nations resolutions against him for having crossed the threshold and become a nuclear weapon state, with now the launch ability to have missiles fired at the United States, mainland United States. That, of course, is reprehensible and should be condemned, because we do not want more nuclear weapon states. We want fewer of them. And indeed, the world spoke very loudly, even though Sri Lanka may not have heard it, by having a treaty for the abolition of nuclear weapons.
As always, it's been a great pleasure having you on the program, and an enlightening experience as well, Mr. Dhanapala. So once again, a Happy New Year to you. May all your wishes come true.
I hope so. Thank you very much for the sake of our people and our country.
So we've been chatting with Jayantha Dhanapala, who's the former UN Under Secretary General for Disarmament Affairs. And on the other side, we have Anushan Selvaraja with more.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Nearly 60% of all businesses in our country are SMEs. Some of our most growth-oriented financial solutions have been customized to serve this sector. That's why we have invested over 500 billion rupees to support the backbone of our economy. Because we believe in banking beyond transactions. HNB, your partner in progress.
Welcome back to Benchmark. I'm Anushan Selvaraja. Now for a closer look at the latest on the LMD Nielsen Business Confidence Index, joining me is the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharang Pant. Welcome back to the show, Sharang. First of all, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Anshan, and Happy New Year to the viewers of Benchmark as well.
Right. Now, Sharang, there seems to be some positive momentum in the BCI. What are the sensitivities behind this?
True. So unlike last year, wherein BCI fell significantly in the last month of the year, fortunately this year there was a marginal uptick. So it moved up from 119 in November to 122 in the month of December. Now the reasons behind that could be the sentiments around the upcoming election, some positive news expected from the government, and at the same time the continuation of the sentiments on the budget, which were positive as we saw in the previous month. So things like the government's efforts on reducing prices, simple things around coconut prices, vegetable prices, etc. Those have helped keep the sentiment uptake going on.
What do business people expect when it comes to the country's economic performance?
Yeah, so that also is moving up gradually. Over the last couple of months, we've seen a significant upward movement. About 1 in 5 business leaders feel that the economy will improve in the next 12 months, backed by the initiatives around small medium enterprises, some uptake growth that we see in the exports as well. Exports grew by 9%, driven mainly by the tea exports.
How do the respondents view our business and investment prospects?
So over there is a small drop in the expectations. When it comes to the long-term expectations, the business prospects in the next 12 months, compared to 33% in the previous quarter, it fell to about 28% in the latest month. Talking about the short-term prospects, again it fell from about 33% to about 24% in the latest month. When we ask leaders what could be the possible reasons behind it, they say that while the economy prospects look up, while their profitability has improved, the demand or the sales have not yet improved. That's a function of the inflation and the consumption patterns going down.
So then what would be your projections for the BCI, Sharang, if you could hazard a guess?
Yeah. So what we feel is it will remain at this around the same level in the month of Jan, and for the month of Feb and March it then again depends on what are the election results, how does the current government fare in the upcoming elections, and therefore what would be the reaction on the economic policies.
Thank you very much for joining us, Sharang.
Thanks, Anisha.
That was the Managing Director of Nielsen, Sharang Pant. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Stay tuned.
When we entered the industry in 1995, a new star was born as a fully owned subsidiary of People's Bank. For those seeking to grow their businesses, PLC provided the seed. We are not only Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company, but also the largest non-banking financial institution. Welcome to a new dawn for the nation. Introducing People's Leasing and Finance, PLC.
LMD is making waves, airwaves. The next big thing from Sri Lanka's pioneering business journal, LMD Podcast, now online. Listen to our articles on the go at www.lmd.lk. Select, play, listen. It's that simple.
Sri Lanka's #1 leasing company is now the nation's largest and highest rated finance company with 2 international ratings. Let us move the nation as one with People's Leasing and Finance PLC.
Gami Pubudua, our microfinance offering makes it possible for the youth of this country who have a viable business plan but lack the funds to realize their dreams. We are committed to grassroots level entrepreneur development because we believe in banking beyond transactions. HNB, your partner in progress.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Anushan Selvarajan. Now for a closer look at the latest on the economy. Joining me is economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Welcome back to the show, Shiran. Happy New Year to you, first of all.
I also wish all the viewers of the program as well Happy New Year, and wish you the same as well.
Now, Shiran, how did our economy unfold coming into 2018?
So 2017, I think largely you saw a lot of stability coming through, at least on the macroeconomic side of things. Reserves improving, the rupee not depreciating as much, and a bit of predictability on that front, exports picking up, and the fiscal deficit sort of coming in line with the envisaged reduction that were planned for. So I think those have set the framework in place for 2018. But there are a lot of new things and the reforms that are coming through. I think now you're seeing a new Foreign Exchange Act. There needs to be a bit more understanding on it. There's more onus on the banking sector to sort of now act as almost the means of exchange for a lot of businesses and individuals, compared to where you have to go to the control of exchange. You have a New England Revenue Act kicking in April as well. So all these, by 2017 we saw some of these reforms taking place. The implementation of this will be key. And overall, I think the government also will need to look at maybe addressing some of the cost of living issues as well, because we're seeing time and time again inclement weather having its toll on food prices, and we can't just go by this as temporary. So while the macros may be shaping up, I think the masses and the micro picture also maybe needs to be looked at.
So what are our economic prospects then this year?
So the prospects, I think this year largely can build on what was done last year. So I think there's good prospects for exports, not simply because we've got the EU GSP plus concessions back, but also demand is improving in most of these economies as well. So that's an uptick as well. There's also more renewed focus on certain sectors, and the government is looking, I think, to develop this national export strategy as well, which will look at some of the more emerging sectors beyond our traditional apparel and tea and rubber exports. So that's good, and I think overall, I think the investment climate is more conducive to a few years ago, where there was a lot of policy inconsistency. Now there is a bit more consistency as to at least what the tax framework is, what the exchange framework is, and things that investors can build on, especially in the next 2 years.
What are the risks that we may face going forward?
So I think the key, one of the biggest risks that a lot of some of the bigger political analysts and consultancy agency highlights is this vacuum that is sort of being created by the US sort of moving away from the region, especially in the Asian region, and China becoming a bigger player, and what that means. Because China is also looking at rebalancing its growth, and they're using this opportunity with their Belt and Road initiative to maybe nullify a bit of the hard landing in terms of growth declining at a faster pace and plugging into the region and connecting through their initiative. So that has a lot of implications because that could obviously mean more infrastructure projects along the line for the region and for countries like Sri Lanka, but also we could maybe see more trade issues with US and China that could have ramifications, and the overall uncertainty with that I think will still linger on. The other issues I think will be particularly on the oil prices, because oil has been edging up. Now it's close to about $67, $68 a barrel. At the start of 2016, 2 years ago, it was around 32, 33. So we're more than double in the last year as well. So that really could have an impact. But having said that as well, what you generally see and what market forecasters are seeing is when oil goes at these levels, shale oil, which is oil drilled in the US, sort of comes more into supply. So we might see more supply, and that might actually reduce the price of oil as well. So those dynamics hang in the balance, but I think as long as we're in the $60-70 a barrel, that will have an impact on Sri Lanka's fuel bill, which obviously will have an impact in terms of the currency as well. And obviously I think the other geopolitical tensions that we're seeing, which we can't ignore, like North Korea and Iran, which could flare up during the year as well. So those are the risks that I think the country should be more mindful of.
Thank you very much for joining us, Shiran.
Pleasure being on the show.
That was economist and LMD columnist Shiran Fernando. Thank you for watching Benchmark, and we hope to see you again next time.